Baptist. A particular welcome to members of the community who've joined us today for Cranley School. Thank you very much for joining us. And of course, a big thanks to Tim for making the journey, not all the way from the north, in Westminster Monday to Wednesday, and then up. His constituency covers a large part of the Lake District and the Dales. For the last 20 years in Parliament there, and not only serving as an MP, previously a leader of the Lib Dems, and chair of Christians in Parliament, which is why obviously we've invited him this evening to talk about that relationship between faith and politics. Just so you know where we're going, I've asked him to speak for about half an hour. There'll then be half an hour of questions. Some questions have been submitted in advance, so I'll ask a few of those, which will give you time then to think of some that we'll just take from the floor. And then there'll be half an hour of refreshments, cake and tea and coffee and stuff, and a chance to chat to Tim before you leave. So thank you very much, Tim, for being here, and I'll hand over to you.
Thank you. Cheers, Mike. So, this is the point where I tested the radio mic is working. Is that all fine? Excellent news. So, if you've come here expecting me to tell you all about the wonders of the Liberal Democrat Manifesto, you're going to be very disappointed. That's not on the billing. Sorry. But I did say I'd take some questions, particularly from A-level students later on. So I often say one of my favourite things to do, apart from being here obviously, is to go to primary schools on a Friday. And amongst the reasons why I love going to primary schools in my patch is because they don't know what they're not meant to ask you. So you get asked awesome questions. My favourite one being is, Tim, when will they know whether or not there are fairies? Which is it's a fantastic question. It's not, are there fairies? It's, when will the select committee report into the existence of fairies or otherwise be released? So just, imagine in half an hour's time when I shut up, I can just about see the clock, so hopefully I will be able to shut up on time. You imagine that you're, a year 5, a year 6, and ask me what you like. I'll try not to go on for too long. Once upon a time, a former parliamentary colleague of mine, who should remain nameless, went to a women's institute in his constituency, and by his own admission, he went on far too long. He was escorted to his car after this session by the secretary of the said Women's Institute, and she said to him, "Thank you so much for coming along, Mr. Ashdown. Oops. Do come again when you have less time." So let's see if I can not do a paddy. So I'm going to talk about 3 things, really. Religion, philosophy and politics. How about that? Desmond Tutu once said that people love to talk. They love to talk about everything and anything that is, apart from religion and politics, which is such a terrible shame, because they're the only things that matter. So let's see if I can have a go at all of those. So first of all, we're going to talk about religion and politics, and in particular Christianity and politics. I probably ought to tell you what I think Christianity is first, and why I am a Christian. And it doesn't mean I'm a good person, it's quite the opposite. There'll be some people who will say, I can't go to church, I'm not a good person, can't be doing all that morality. It's the absolute reverse. The Christian message tells you that the word I use is scumbags, right? I mean, the Bible says sinners, but I say we're all scumbags, we're all fallen, we're all flawed, and church is where you come to hear about Jesus, who is the answer to that. I was not brought up in a Christian household, loving household. I was brought up to be a questioning, sceptical, liberal sort of person who was very English. Don't be keen about anything. Don't get too keen about anything. That is very, very un-English if you're a little bit too zealous and into anything at all. And certainly you should question anybody who looks as though they're convicted about anything. And then, because an awful long story short, at the end of 6th form, just before I went off to university a million years ago when I was 18, a set of circumstances happened where I ended up reading a bunch of books that I didn't mean to. And they were books, these days you call them apologetics, but they were books about the defence of an intellectual defence of the case for Christianity. And the penny dropped for me one night. Oh, flippin' heck, it's true. Flipping heck, it's true. So just a moment, I should tell you what is it that's true. If you've ever heard a politician being interviewed, there's lots of verbal tics that people tend to use. You will have heard, if you ever watch, the Laura Kuenssberg programme, I don't, it's work, I don't bother. But if you ever watch Laura Kuenssberg or any of those interviewers, politicians will nearly always start an answer with, let me be clear. I want to be clear about this. I want to be very, very clear about this, Laura. And the thing is, often what politicians then do is not be clear. And the thing is about Jesus, he's dead clear. Lots of people think that Jesus is a nice, interesting teacher that has interesting and pleasant things to say, that might be a bit challenging. He's a philosopher, he was a good bloke, he probably existed, and that's about where it is. And I don't think Jesus allows us to think that. I'll pinch from C.S. Lewis, because as a Christian I've kind of got to, it's in the description somewhere. But he said that Jesus could either be Lord, liar, or lunatic. In other words, he made the claims that he did, and it's true. Let's park that for a minute, because I think they are true. He made the claims he did, and he believed them to be true, but they weren't. He was mad, lunatic. He made the claims he did, he knew them not to be true. He was a liar, very bad man. And some people say there's a fourth L. So Lord, liar, lunatic, or legend. In other words, you can't really trust this stuff about Jesus you read in the New Testament. I mean, it was written hundreds and hundreds of years afterwards. It's just snowballed. He was a good teacher, but in the hundreds of years that followed afterwards, he kind of, people who were following him decided to make stuff up about him. That absolutely doesn't stack up. Just for what it's worth, the early authorship of the Gospels are pretty secure. There are a whole range of eyewitnesses who write in the New Testament. They write within the lifetime of people who were around when Jesus was around. We got very early manuscript copies. If you're hoping that you can get out from underneath the thumb of Jesus by just believing it is all legend and made up 100 years later, that's definitely not on the table. So you're left with Lord, liar, and lunatic as your options. And I think if you look at what Jesus claims, I said, let me be clear, he is clear. What does he say? He says, I am the way, the truth, the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. That's colossal. That is a person making an exclusive claim that only he is the way you can know God and have salvation. Only him. Not other routes, only him. Now, and then at the same time, you've got this guy who's healing the sick, who's really kind, who's gentle, who's humble. He's, the God of the universe. He breathed galaxies into existence, and yet he's getting alongside people with leprosy. He's loving people who are poor, who are marginalised, the outcasts of society. And so the kind of evil megalomaniac just doesn't stack up. And yet if you claim to be the only route to eternal life, the only route to God, what an astonishing claim that is. And remember, all those people who said this about him, it said that of the 12 disciples, 11 of them went to their deaths for proclaiming that Jesus had risen from the dead. 11 of them. And the other one died of old age on a prison island. Now, look, you've heard of people who have committed religiously inspired acts of suicide bombing. Sorry to talk about that. But those people, when they've done that, evil acts that they did, they believed sincerely in what they believed. And if it wasn't true, they didn't know it wasn't true, because they weren't first-hand eyewitnesses. They were umpteenth-hand receivers of a truth. But if all those disciples went to their deaths, crucified upside down, run through with the sword, strangled, for proclaiming that Jesus had risen from the dead, if that was not true, why would they die for a lie? Why would they die for a lie? Now, does this prove for certain that Jesus Christ is the Son of God? No, I can't prove it like you can in a laboratory or in a mathematical equation. But I'm going to quote a woman called Professor Molly Worthen, who is an American historian who was an atheist. And a few years ago, she became a Christian, and her friend said to her, "Are you mad? Do you believe all this stuff? Are you sure? Are you 100% sure Jesus rose from the dead?" And she said, "No, but I am well north of 51%. And that being the case, what a fool I'd be not to make that next step. So I just want to say that, so I'm not a Christian because I'm a good person. I'm not a Christian because I think the Bible says lots of wonderful things. It's like a manifesto, and I tick all those boxes. The Bible says tons of things that I find personally offensive. But if there was a real God, he wouldn't just endorse the things you already thought, would he? That would be evidence that he'd be made up. Richard Dawkins would be right about that God. He'd be delusion. But if there was a real God, he'd disturb you. He'd contradict you. And the God of the Bible does. But he also provides you ultimate meaning. Your life is not meaningless. It is worth something. And you matter so much that the God who breathed 2 trillion galaxies into existence knows you personally and chose to die for you. So, that is what I believe. And it's what the Bible teaches. And if you think that's mad, so do lots of people. But I'm convinced of its truth. So given that's the case, why would I bother with politics? Well, let's come to that in a moment. Why or how should Christians even engage with it? But before I get that, I want to deal with the philosophy bit, really. Is it at all legitimate? Is it at all acceptable for Christians to bring their faith into the public square? And I wrestle with that a lot. And I think sometimes slightly contradictory things on the matter. Because on one hand, I absolutely believe that I don't have a right to legislate to make people who are not Christians behave as though they were. I think that's massively counterproductive for one thing. Edmund Burke, you may have read about Edmund Burke, who was a Tory MP in the 17th century. Very interesting guy, and lots of fascinating things he said. I can quote more from him on other issues later, but he said, amongst the other things he said, that all the laws against the godless have not saved one single soul. But in the end, what value is it to force people into things that they don't believe? So I believe that. And then on the other hand, I believe that my Christianity does and should affect my worldview and therefore what I say, think, believe and practice in terms of my politics. What do I mean by that? Well, first of all, every single person in this room has got a worldview. I don't know how you describe it. Whether it's political, philosophical, Christian, or religious, particularly irreligious, it doesn't matter. You've got a worldview. Now, you might be able to say, I get it from that book, Das Kapital, or the Bible, or the Quran, or something else that you've read. Or maybe it's a combination of stuff that you consciously have taken on board and stuff that you've subconsciously sort of absorbed throughout your life. It's about the place that you've been put. No doubt we would think very different things if we were brought up in a different culture to the one that we've brought in. It's often described as being a bit like, whether fish even realise they're wet. Do you notice the air that you breathe? When you think about it, you do, but most of the time we don't think about it. Just the same way we don't think about the culture we're around, we're immersed in it. We are wringing wet, if you like, with the culture around us. Yes, yet we don't think about it. See, we've all got a worldview. Isn't it just a bit bogus to say that for some people, their worldview can come into the arena and others are going to leave it at the door. The rest of us are going to be empty-headed. So I just think it doesn't make any sense to say that my faith mustn't affect my politics. I kind of think it just does. And so that is acceptable. I'll come back in a minute as to what that actually means for me when I think about politics and think about people. But it's also just worth bearing in mind that I think there is a sense in the West that in our culture and in our politics that the assumption is that the default kind of neutral position is the absence of a belief in God. That's the neutral position. And the eccentric position, in the literal sense of the word, to be off-centre, the eccentric position is that you might have a religious faith, but the default neutral position is that absence of belief in God. I think that's a load of rubbish. I don't think there's any neutrality at all. Christianity is not neutral. Neither is atheism. Neither is wherever it is that you might be on that continuum between the two or any other kind of faith position. I think a really crucial thing I'd say for every liberal to understand is that there is no such thing as neutrality. And once you know that, then that's fine. What we're then understanding is how we can disagree well, which is really important. How can we have the right to try to persuade other people to change their view whilst respecting the people who retain a view different to ours. And I think that is partly a working of a Christian. Say that my faith. How so? And I think the fundamental way it affects my politics is maybe threefold. But the first is this. If you look, I think I'm going on and off at the moment. Am I reasonably audible? One off and I'll go. Is that all right? Ooh, yes, it's all right. The 3 or 4 people who've nodded off have now woken up. This is all good. Yes, so, yeah, 3 things, I think. Probably more than that, but let's pick 3. The first is this. If you look at the beginning of the Bible and the creation account, it talks about how God breathed everything into existence. When in the Bible it talks about heaven and the heavens, it can often mean one of 2 things. It will mean either the spiritual realm in which God dwells, and often when we refer to the heavens, it means what you can see up there in the night sky. And so we now know, I said 2 trillion galaxies, we might know more than that now, but I don't know if you are, but I am a colossal space nerd. I'm a massive space nerd, and I am blown away by the regular pictures we now have from the James Webb telescope that look further than we ever have before. And we see amazing clusters in the far reaches of the visible, just about visible universe. We see galaxies that are, 12, 13 billion light years away. Colossal, amazing structures that blow our mind. When you look through that creation account, it says that God created them. He spoke them into existence. It doesn't matter whether you believe they were 6 or 7 real days. It would take God 6 or 7 real nanoseconds because he's God. So he breathed those things into existence, and there's an order of creation, and then it gets to human beings. And human beings, we don't just hear they're good, we hear they're very good. And when we get to human beings, we hear that they're made in the image of God. So what does that mean? That means every single one of you is more awesome and more valuable than all of those awesome galaxies. If you're not feeling very pleased with yourself at the moment, if you're feeling a bit miserable, if life is not great for you at the moment, just remember that. That is a truth. You are worth more and of greater value to the God of the universe than the whole of the created universe. That's an amazing fact. If that's true, then how dare I vote to do some harm to you? I have a duty to serve you. I have a duty to defend your rights and your freedoms and to provide for your welfare. And so even the people who think the least of me are people made in the image of God, and they are of enormous value and dignity. Enormous value and dignity. So that will absolutely colour my view of the world. The second thing is that is the reality of there being a God and that I am not my own. I think it's arguable that the God of this age is autonomy. I must have absolute control over every bit of me, which doesn't work if you believe in such a thing as community and society as well. But it is utterly countercultural to believe there's a God of the universe to whom you owe absolutely everything. And then the third thing is, I hinted at it earlier on, but it's what Christians refer to as grace. So the sense is that I have nothing which qualifies me to be accepted by God. And yet, because Jesus died for me, I am totally acceptable to God. And therefore, I can't screw it up. If my place in eternity is dependent upon me being a good lad, I'm knackered. I'm absolutely stuffed. Because as we already established, I'm a scumbag. But my place in eternity and my meaning and worth and value is dependent on the God of the universe who chose to die for me and you. And that means I can't lose it, because it's based on his performance, not on mine. If it was down to me, it would all be over by breakfast. But it's not. It's up to him. And given that grace, given the forgiveness I've received for my multiple scumbaggery, then I must hold out forgiveness to you as well. That means people who come to me in need, how dare I turn them away? So those are kind of 3 ways in which my worldview is coloured by my Christianity. And so it should be, so it should be. So let's now, in the moments I have left before we open up to questions, just have a little think. So some of you are Christians, some of you are not. I hope this will be of value to all of you. I spend a lot of my time thinking
about how Christians should think about politics. And I've got two basic conclusions as to how Christians should think about politics. And in the first instance, I just want to say, this isn't me saying that every Christian needs to put a rosette on and stand for Parliament. You know, a small percentage of you might do, and I would encourage you to do so. But a much larger majority won't. But I still think we need to be aware of politics, informed, and looking at the political world through a biblical lens, if you like. So, here are my two thoughts. The first is this. So, we've talked about the Bible. Let's think of another famous book, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Anybody read it? Seen it? Awesome. Yes, I thoroughly recommend it. And the radio and television versions from the 70s and 80s are particularly good. I have a feeling it's got made into a film. But the front page, the front cover of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy has got two words. It goes, don't panic. Don't panic. So thing one for Christians when it comes to relating to the world of politics is don't panic. Don't panic. I sat through a series of sermons in my church up in Kendal in Cumbria 3 or 4 years ago on the book of Revelation. Now, there's lots of things I could talk to you about the book of Revelation, but let's just pick out one aspect of it. Throughout the book of Revelation, there's lots of imagery. And a lot of the imagery refers to Babylon. And Babylon was a great empire about, someone will put me right, sort of 600, 700, 800 BC. Now, the first readers of those letters, that letter, or the others that comprise the book of Revelations, were first century Christians, most of whom were persecuted for being so. This is like 300 plus years before Christianity became the adopted religion of Rome. Several hundred years of persecution before that happened, and of course since. But so why on earth does John, the writer of Revelation, talk about Babylon such a lot if it's been in rubble for the best part of a millennium, certainly more than half a millennium? And I wonder if the answer, I say I wonder, Paul, my pastor, said this, and I think he's got a point. I wonder, he wonders, if it was to do with that reality that the Christians who were the first readers, first hearers of that letter being read out in their churches, about their experiences. So, yes, Babylon had been in rubble and dust for hundreds of years, and Rome wasn't. Rome was terrifying. Rome was real. Rome was reigning. Rome oppressed them. Rome was putting them into the arena and having them gobbled up by lions. Rome was persecuting them to within an inch and beyond of their lives. And maybe, subtly, amongst the other messages of the book of Revelation, to those early Christians was, do not worry. Rome will go the same way as Babylon. And it surely did. And so when I say don't panic, you may be feeling, and I do, I don't say this flippantly at all, because I also fear for what's happening in our world, in our country, the world my children and their children may inherit. I do. But I am reminded that every single empire, every single election victory, every single referendum win, every regime, every president, every king, every queen, every prime minister, temporary. Every kingdom and every empire, every regime that has ever existed will end up in dust and rubble. Save one. Save one. And so over those last 2,000 years, there have been dozens, if not hundreds and more, confident ideologies that have mocked Christianity and wished for its demise, or indeed predicted its demise. They are in rubble, and Christianity continues. So if you are a Christian and you are terrified about the state of the world, I'm with you. I'm with you. Don't panic. I don't mean to be flippant, but I've read to the end of Revelation, and if you're trusting Jesus, it ends really, really, really well. Really well. Do not panic. It's all going to end up in rubble. Don't panic, but do care. But do care. Because the danger, I think, that I come across when I think about Christians and politics, the danger is that they can do one of two things. They can either decide that Christianity is, and I quote the title of my book and my podcast, it's such a mucky business that you want to keep it at arm's length. Christians don't want to get their hands dirty with that sort of filthy, compromised, sinful stuff. Politics is awful, keep out of it altogether. Or else You believe the Bible's true, Jesus will come back one day, all of this is just temporary and pointless. Why should I invest any time in this, this world which is passing? I think they're both wrong takes. And I think that what we need to remember is that when Jesus was on this earth, he demonstrated an absolute care for the people who were in front of him. We are told to seek the welfare of the country in which you have been placed. We're told to love our neighbour. And by the way, in the Bible, love is never sentimental, wishy-washy. It is always practical, costly, sacrificial. So to love your neighbour will cost you, and it will be practical. It will not be thoughts and prayers, hearts and flowers. It will mean something tangible. And politics is the way in which people make decisions over how people's lives will go. So if you are a refugee, your fate will depend on a decision of a politician. The fact you are a refugee is because of a decision of a politician. If your hospital waiting list is too long for you to live, that's a decision of a politician. If the economy is in a mess and you can't afford to pay the rent, that's the decision of a politician. If you're in a situation where you can't afford a home because of ludicrous spiralling house prices, you can't get a mortgage, that's all about decisions made by politicians. Whatever your opinion, there's no doubt that the fate of your neighbour, and by the way, the Good Samaritan parable tells us that everybody is your neighbour, everybody. The fate of your neighbour is dependent upon politics. So you can't wash your hands of it and pretend it's not important. It's massively important. Yes, those decisions will be taken by flawed and sinful people, and some of them will be bad, they'll certainly be imperfect. Nevertheless, those decisions matter. And so just to go back into the record of Jesus when he was here. So some of you will have heard of Tim Keller, who passed away a couple of years ago, who's a great writer and a speaker, a very lovely man, very thoughtful man, an American. And he said a number of things, but I remember him saying that if you look at Jesus' miracles, none of them are skywriting. None of them are rabbits pulled out of a hat. None of them are just exhibitions of his power and miraculousness for the sake of it. They were all about dealing with people's conditions. They were even the most, dare I say, frivolous of the miracles, the turning of water into wine. That was about saving a family from disgrace at a wedding when they'd run out. But otherwise, it was about healing people, going alongside people who were the absolute outsiders, lepers, being alongside them, touching them, the first human contact they may have had for years, and healing them, healing people who were sick and had all manner of afflictions. And Jesus healed them, and he was in front of them. But the one that always sticks out to me is the raising of Lazarus. If you know the account, Lazarus is a guy who's a friend of Jesus. He's got two sisters, Mary and Martha. And I don't give you the whole story, but basically Lazarus dies. He turns up at Bethany where the sisters live. Lazarus has been in the tomb for, I think, 4 days at this point. And the end point is that Lazarus is raised from the dead. Now, we've established that if Jesus is the God of the universe, so he knows he's going to raise this man from the dead. But he doesn't, if you read the text, he doesn't say to Mary and Martha, pull yourselves together, girls, look what I'm about to do. He doesn't do that. Some of the most famous passages in the Bible are in the run-up to that miracle. And they are, Jesus wept. Jesus was deeply moved. Once more, Jesus was deeply moved. Now, I mentioned Tim Keller a few moments ago. A few years ago, I was in my flat in London cooking some terrible pasta dish. And I don't get the chance to do that very often, but every now and again, as we established earlier on, I batch cook. So I was batch cooking some awful pasta sauce. And whilst I was doing so, I thought, I'll listen to something. Sometimes I listen to podcasts. Sometimes I will listen to music. Very often late 70s, early 80s, post-punk. You know, I always say there's no such thing as a golden age, but musically there was. But this particular night, I did a bit of a shuffle, and I ended up listening to a sermon by Tim Keller. I could have picked, he was a pastor for 30, 40 years. It could have been any one of hundreds. It just so happened, by chance, let's say, or providence, it landed on the sermon that Tim Keller gave to his Manhattan church on the Sunday after 9/11. There were empty pews in that church as he spoke. Sorry. And he talked about, his text was the raising of Lazarus, and he talked about those 3 short verses. Jesus wept. Jesus was moved. Jesus once more was deeply moved. And he says, they are rubbish English translations of the original. Now, I do not know my New Testament Greek, so do not quiz me about anything to do with that. But Tim Keller did know his New Testament Greek. And apparently, Jesus wept, Jesus was moved, Jesus once more was deeply moved as he approached the tomb. The actual translation should read that Jesus approached the tomb growling and bawling like a wild animal. Now, if you're wondering why that gets me, God has a character. Every one of you has got character, a character. If someone was to describe you, your strengths, your abilities, your capabilities, what you're like, you could say the same about Jesus. That furious bawling as he approached the tomb, which doesn't sound like kind of the gracious thing of Jesus, meek and mild, does it? It tells you what he's like. And if the most powerful being who ever walked on this earth is angry and furious at the thing we fear the most, we're in a good place. We're in a good place. If the God of the universe hates the thing we hate with such a passion, you're in a good place. We are in a very good place. So he did not say, pull yourself together, girls, I'm going to sort this out in a minute. And he wasn't a fake either. So what was this about? This was Jesus authentically entering in to the pain in which he was placed at that moment. Not a word of a lie. Not a word of a lie. And that's a little window into how we should think about politics and the world around us. Yes, do not panic. God is on the throne. It is going to end well. The just, righteous God of the universe, who is all love and is all justice, we have nothing to fear about this world if we are trusting in him. Don't panic, but do care, and care deeply. You get your hands dirty, you get your heart broken, and you throw yourself into the community you've been placed. You will not be able to solve every problem. You will not be able to fix everything that is put in front of you. Do not let that get you down. You've been placed where you are. Moses, at one point in Exodus, somebody will tell me which chapter, says rather pathetically to God, what can I do? What am I meant to do to lead these people? And God says, what's in your hand? What is in your hand? He had a stick. That's what he had, a shepherd's crook. That's what he had in his hand. And the question to you, Christian or not really, is what's in your hand? It may be your talent. It might be your time. It might be the people you've got around you, the place you've been put, the profession that you have. What is in your hand? Well, you use that to serve God, and you serve God by loving your neighbour, and you'll do that sometimes at your personal cost. I've done half an hour. I'll shut up now. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Tim. That's, really appreciate that. Shame to cut you short, but it would be good to have some questions. So I'm going to ask a few of the prepared ones that were sent in by some of the students. But in the meantime, have a little think if you'd like to ask a question. So there's no way we'll get to all of these, but one or two. What do you think, Tim, are the current benefits of having bishops sit in the House of Lords? And do you think that privilege is justified in a pluralistic society?
That's a great question, and it sounds like an A-level question. How's that? Shall I just keep talking? It might come on eventually. Yeah, we'll do it. We'll swap. It's all going very well. If you were starting from scratch, you would not have a House of Lords. I think that the argument against the House of Lords, which I broadly believe myself, is that we shouldn't have a legislature that doesn't have a democratic mandate. So I would have the Lords elected, or the upper house, the Senate, whatever we call it, elected. Nevertheless, I'm mindful of the fact that the Lords does a good job in some respects. It tends to provide far more scrutiny of legislation than the House of Commons does. That's partly because you've got older, wiser people in there, maybe, some people would say. It's also partly because a good chunk of the Lords are not of any political party. There's the crossbenchers or independents. The bishops are separate to that, but they're a little bit like that. I'll come back to them in a moment. And the other thing is, yes, most lords are members of a party and have the party whip, but with the exception of the bishops, you're there for life. Somebody pointed out to me there are more lords aged over 90 than there are aged under 40. You know, what can the whips do to you, for pity's sake? You know, you're there for life. There's nothing they can. So you're in there's a much looser relationship between the whips and the members in the lords. So if you were going to replace the lords, and I would want us to, let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. How can we make sure we build an elected chamber where you maintain the kind of wisdom and the kind of weaker party allegiances that we have in the Lords, which are good. The bishops. So I think, I mean, I'm opposed to being an established church. I would not. I would disestablish the Church of England for a variety of reasons. I just think in the end we don't legislate to make people Christians. I think a country becomes Christian, so to speak, by the members of that society choosing to become Christians themselves individually. I don't think that by establishing a church, a state religion, that is in any way wise. Brackets. I also don't think we should have the state religion of atheism either. And the idea that atheism is neutral and that Christianity, another religious point of view, is not, and therefore, you know, we should all subscribe to the absence of faith. It goes back to what I said earlier on. I think there's no such thing as neutrality. So whatever you do is going to be a mess. The government is going to get rid of the 92 hereditary peers in a few months' time, and they're not going to get rid of the bishops. My sense is, get rid of the bishops when you get rid of the House of Lords altogether and reform it properly. It would feel a bit odd just to take them out. But I'm not wedded to it, not least because I think we shouldn't have a Church of England. You can still call yourselves the Church of England, but
am I on now?
Not to be the state church.
Another question here. What is your view on Trump's hostility to DEI programs, given your previous comments about the Liberal Democrats being too male and too pale?
Well, that's exciting, that. There's two bits to that. So first of all, the thing that makes me most angry about that question is the use of the phrase DEI. That is an American acronym. We do not use that phrase. So all these people who claim to be patriots getting cross about DEI, stop being so influenced by Americanisms. So we call it diversity and inclusion or whatever, I don't know. I mean, so my view, for what it's worth, when I said those things, I was president of the Liberal Democrats and we didn't have a single non-white member of Parliament, and I think we had 49 or 50 male MPs and 8 or 9 women MPs. We now have, I mean, in the last Parliament, we had 2/3 of our MPs. In fact, we had women. I think we had more people called Sarah in our parliamentary party than we had men. So we managed to, but in part that's because we did do some DEI. And I think if you've got people who are marginalised, underrepresented, it's not wrong to try and find a way to correct that, because there's reasons why people are marginalised. And like I said earlier on, we are blinded by the culture we're in. We don't understand often our own biases and prejudices. And so sometimes you need to have an institutional correction of them. But mostly, I think we shouldn't be importing stupid Americanisms.
Do you believe that UK politics has become increasingly secular and has therefore led to a tyranny of the majority, in which more non-religious MPs and electorate are having too much power over those who do follow religion?
Oh, great question. Discuss. There's 2,000 words there for you. Well, first of all, I appreciate the John Stuart Mill quote, the tyranny of opinion, did we say there?
Tyranny of the majority.
Tyranny of the majority, which is also a John Stuart Mill line. The tyranny of opinion is where you're not banned from thinking stuff, but you kind of are because of, social convention. The tyranny of the majority, I mean, to be a liberal is to recognise that minorities have right, and that includes minorities who just think something different from the majority. And so, I mean, I've had a lot of groups, not in my constituency, but in my district, so near Barrow in Furness, been a huge furore about the establishment of a new mosque at a place called Dalton. And I'm outraged by the outrage. I disagree with Islam. I was with an imam on Friday night, and we had a lovely conversation about things, and there's stuff we just disagree on. But we disagreed well. And I think the idea that we would tip-ex out or seek to block people having a place of worship just because we don't believe that is an outrage. And so I want to defend people's rights to not believe in a God, although I want to encourage atheists to realise they do have a faith, and it does have serious consequences on their worldview. That's perhaps for another day. But I think that, so are we heading in a more secular direction? I definitely would have said yes until recently. There feels in the last year or two like this is a society which is increasingly searching for meaning. Atheism is not only not true, in my opinion, it's also deeply unsatisfying. It doesn't give you any answers about the world at all. And so I think there's a movement back in that direction. And I don't get too worried about these things. If the Bible's true, then I know who wins. And he's on his throne now, and he was then, and he always will be. So, but it does concern me, because I think a society that's cut itself off from, the Christian underpinnings of our values, that everybody matters, that there's nobody above or beneath the law, that everybody has equal dignity. If you stop believing in the source of those things, then maybe you lose those things. There's Os Guinness said that we are living in a cut flower society. You cut the flowers, you stick them in a jar, they look just as beautiful as they did in your garden for a bit. And then they go off and they die because they're no longer rooted in what gave them life in the first place. And there is an argument that says that some of the problems in Western society is because we're cut flowers. We grew out of a soil of that Christian belief in ultimate human dignity and nobody being able to lord it over anybody else. But we've cut the flowers and they're withering.
Last question from the pre-set ones, and then over to the floor. Liberal Democrats, when you resigned as leader of the Liberal Democrats, you were reported as saying that you could not reconcile your Christian faith with your responsibilities as leader of a Liberal party, and that to live as a committed Christian and to hold faithful to the Bible's teachings had felt impossible. Could you explain what are the principles and values of your party which are at variance with holding to a biblical view?
So every political party will be at variance of holding a biblical view. If you expect Jesus to endorse your politics, you are going to be crushingly disappointed. And if you try to appropriate Jesus to justify your politics, you will also be more than disappointed. So I don't think my party is any more or less Christian than any other. Arguably, the values of Western liberalism, which are, I think, gospel-sourced, are more fruitful in the liberal tradition than any other. That's what I think. It doesn't mean that you need to think that. So I think, for me, I was the president of the Liberal Democrats during our time in coalition government, so I got some focus on my faith in Christ during that time, but most of it came during the period that I was leader of the party, which was a tumultuous period. We just got annihilated down to 8 MPs. It was an absolute shellacking. I mean, we were, within the margin of error of not existing at all. And my job was to rebuild them and stop us dying, frankly. And of those 8 MPs, I reckon 4 of them would have been quite happy not to have won. And no names mentioned. And then, of course, we had the referendum on Brexit halfway through. Liberal Democrats took a very, very, very clear position on that, and it probably saved us. Turns out that sometimes being a bit offensive works, and having a position that marks you out and you're a bit Marmite. But what happened also is we did save the party, we did grow the party, and lived to fight another day. But for me as leader, during 2 or 3 seasons of my time as leader, press just wanted to kind of focus on what I thought what the Bible says about sex and sexuality, private morality and all that kind of thing. And I suppose I got myself into a situation where I just thought, do you know what? I am not dealing with this very well. And I can either just water down my faith a bit in order to be a leader who people will hear without all that sort of stuff, or, and therefore car crashing my faith, or I could just be completely faithful and down the line and be a terrible leader. Because the problem was, we were a party, like I say, we were on 8 MPs, 6 or 7% in the polls, if that. We'd been completely annihilated. And all we got was the occasional bit of coverage of me. And it's a bit like having your only advertising hoarding vandalised every single day. Your message never gets across. And so I just took the view that the best thing for me to do is to step back. And if you think about it, I joined the Liberals when I was 16. I'd become an MP at just shy of 35. I've been a councillor before that for several years. I ended up being a front bench spokesperson, party president. I then get to be party leader of a party I belonged to and up since I was 16. My motives to want to be leader were partly good and partly just, normal human ambition. Why wouldn't I want to be at the top of this organisation that I've been in since I was a kid? And so you've got to ask yourself, and I asked myself, what would it take to make you voluntarily give up that thing, the highest position I was ever likely to get to, let's be honest, which maybe not that high, but it's still the highest I was ever likely to get to. And it had to be something, I quoted Isaac Watts in my resignation speech, so amazing, so divine, that it demanded my life, my heart, my all. And so I always say, I'm delighted I was leader, and I'm delighted I'm not leader. It allows me to serve my constituency well, or as well as I hope I can. And it also gives me the opportunity, a bit of time, to come and do stuff like this. Because I did screw up. I told you I was a scumbag. And God has only got scumbags to work with. And so here I am, and I'm glad to be made use of in some small way. So yeah, that's why I stepped down. Somebody wiser than me would have navigated it better. I always say that Christianity is always countercultural in every single era we have ever lived through. And so there's always going to be a glass ceiling of some kind for Christians in just about every single profession you can think of. And we're told to rejoice in that reality. Maybe I might have pushed that glass ceiling a bit further up if I'd been a bit wiser. But I wasn't, and that's fine.
So you need that one now. Great. So I'm going to take this so that I can bring it round. Are there any questions from the floor? Would anyone like to ask a question? I was going to give preference not to Cranley students in case there are any further questions outside of Cranley School, but no, good to see the questions.
Yeah.
With the growth of the Quiet Revival and growing of kind of Christianity among the youth, what would you recommend Christians who are kind of youthful do to kind of advance Christianity?
Well, so there's a great, it's in 1 Peter, isn't it? Always be ready with an answer for anybody asks you for the reason that for the hope that you give, the hope that you have. Always be ready. So pray for opportunities to share your faith and practice. I read that line, that verse, as telling us, don't expect God to deliver words into your head. Maybe he will sometimes, pray for that, but you need to work out how would I actually explain Jesus to somebody? How do I get people, don't be annoying, you can leave it out to them, you scatter a few seeds, they may or may not be interested. If they're not interested, wait for another time. But just think about what phrases you'd use, what you found to be true. That's what I do. And in terms of being a Christian in politics, I just think it's a great way to serve people and live out your loving of your neighbour in a practical way in the place you've been put. Even if it's just filling in potholes, that's still a service.
I saw a hand or two at the back here.
As a Christian, how can you justify spending on defence and military?
It's a great. I think you can. I can see people making the case for pacifism from a Christian perspective. But I can also see, so we live in a fallen and absolutely flawed world, and there are very evil people. One of the things that I dislike about the culture war and the rise of fake news is this idea that just because, I'm just going to name names now. Kamala Harris is bad, and therefore the fact that Donald Trump is worse doesn't matter. Everybody's bad. I don't buy that. There are degrees, we might be all sinners, yes we are all sinners, but some people are doing more harm and potentially doing more harm than others. And, as we stood at Remembrance just a week or so ago, I have mixed emotions. I think about that First World War, and I think what an absolute flipping waste of needless loss of lives. And then I think of the Second World War, where my Uncle Morris was, shot down as a 19-year-old rear gunner, and I think, no, they were deeply wicked, evil people, and we wouldn't have defeated them on a few protest marches. You have to, and as somebody who, I'm a peacenik if you like, but we are in a world which is full of evil, full of dangerous people, and frankly, the way to avert war is to be so strong and well armed that your enemy doesn't want to take you on. Putin would not have invaded Ukraine, I'll say controversially, if Ukraine had still had their nukes.
Any other questions not from Cranley School? It's very good to have the questions from Cranley School, but I want to make sure there we go.
Politics is a bit of a brutal business. I just wondered how you cope with that, those brutal things when they happen.
Well, I mean, there have been times when it's been really deeply brutal. I love 90% of what I do. And there certainly was times when I was, as leader, you feel under so much pressure, you feel like the whole party's fate is on your hands, you recognise that you may not have done things which are pleasing to God, you worry about your family. So there are moments where it's felt deeply crushing, and I kind of don't feel that now. So sometimes you've got to, often many of us will have been through tough times, and it's hard sometimes to imagine how you felt at the time. So I thank God for that, actually. But I don't want to overplay it. The fact is, lots of people go through stressful times. You're a head teacher, any kind of teacher, an Ofsted coming, that's pressure. Whatever, you've got exams coming, that is pressure. You're the parent or a grandparent with someone with exams coming, or someone who's going through a difficult time in their lives, mentally and emotionally. That is difficult. So what difficulties I face are nothing compared to many people, or certainly no wildly different. I think there is an issue with, being in the public eye. I think, and first of all, I think knowing that God's in control and that whatever happens to me is His will, and even if it feels bad, He's got good purpose in it. That's massively helpful. Then on the other hand, I think it's just, when difficult things happen to you, it's good to be humbled. It's good to be humble. Somebody, I think it was Gore Vidal. Gore Vidal once said, "Politics is showbiz for ugly people." And it's a great line. And there's something in that, because I used to be the lead singer of a really terrible band. We were once, the only writer we ever had, we were dismissed as a fourth-rate New Order. Quite proud of that, actually. It's not bad. There are worse people to be a fourth-rate version of. But there is an argument that, people, that I think of all, the besetting sin of the average politician is probably not the kind of sensational, lurid stuff you read about in the tabloids. It's probably just vanity. So sometimes tough stuff happening to you and you being made to look like an idiot is good for you.
Another question.
You kind of touched on this, but as the former leader of the Lib Dems, what does liberal democracy mean to you, and how increasingly important do you think that interpretation is in this uncertain political climate?
Yeah, okay. I mean, I think so. Liberalism is, I suppose, in one sense, the belief that people should have the freedom to do as they wish, up until the point it damages somebody else's freedoms. And that's the difference, I would say, between a liberal and a libertarian. And if you want, as somebody quoted John Stuart Mill earlier on, that's where you want to go. And so that is why, for example, I'm going to say something controversial now, is why I felt that I was being properly liberal by opposing the assisted dying legislation, because that's about personal autonomy. But if you legislate for it to happen, then the evidence is people will self-coerce or be the victims of coercive control, and their deaths would not have happened if the law hadn't changed. So if it was just a self-regarding freedom, then absolutely that would be fine. And that's the difference, I think, between liberalism and libertarianism. But to be a liberal also, a social liberal, I guess we'd say, as opposed to socialism and as opposed to classical liberalism, is to believe that it's not just good enough to be free from things, so persecution and discrimination and so on, but to be free to do something. And that's where the economics comes in. So we can all be free to go to university, we'll all be free to buy our own home, no law stopping you, but if you can't afford it, you haven't got that freedom. And so I think so that's where I think so liberalism economically probably sits centre-left. We believe in the freedom to run a business. We believe in a level of redistribution of wealth to create that freedom. And we also believe in, therefore, pooling resources by having a decent-sized state, a mixed economy to provide services so that, your ability to survive an illness is not that much less because you are not as well off. And then the other thing to say about liberalism, it's about an understanding about the relationship between the individual and the state. When all said and done, Churchill said democracy is a terrible system, it's just better than all the alternatives. And one of the reasons why it's not perfect is because we mentioned earlier on the short-termism. People only think 5 years hence. And you also have this natural desire for, and which is why democracy is a good system, natural desire for people in power to overreach. And so if you think the individual should have more power versus the state, then you'd be against things like ID cards. You'd be in favour of things like human rights legislation. You might not like some people who get off, but one day it might be you. One day it might be, if you're not prepared to defend the rights of the most unpopular minority you can think of, don't expect your rights to be protected. So that's a quick summary. From there.
What about Christianity do you think is the reason why it has become predominantly a force on the right of politics today, and a voice like yours on the left of politics, and being a fervent Christian, is quite unusual?
So, well, first of all, I think times change. I mean, so really you're saying that Christianity, fervent Christianity, seems to be more of a thing on the right. So I'm going to, as all A-level students must, challenge the assumption in the question. So I think that there certainly is some, if you look at the states, then obviously what we see from the states is that the Christian bloc in America is firmly Republican. There's some truth in that, but actually it's white evangelicals. If you look at non-white evangelicals, they're not predominantly voting for the Republican Party. They have been doing since the late 70s. Between 70 and 80% of white evangelicals have been voting Republican from the late 70s, from Ronald Reagan's era. So people who think that Christians are specifically to blame, and I'm not just saying this to defend Christians, because we mess up like anybody else does, and you might be for Donald Trump, and that is fine. But people will say, it's Christians the reason why Donald Trump's president. It's not. I mean, 75% of white evangelical Christians in America voted for John McCain, and he hated them and said so. So it's important to remember, I read a piece in, I forgot who it was in, but it's a guy called Aaron Wrenn, an academic from the States, about 3 or 4 days after the American presidential election last year. And he said Trump could only have been re-elected in a post-Christian America. And what he meant by that was, yes, there's the blocks who vote for who they vote for, and they always do. But there's a whole bunch of people in America, cut flower society, detached from the Christian values that maybe their parents and grandparents had had, who just weren't fussed about a bloke who assaulted women and said awful things and mocked disabled people. That we'd stopped having standards anymore, I say controversially. Because Trump's politics are far less of an anathema to me than his character. That's why I could never vote for him. Now, there's an issue about where Christianity sits on the political spectrum, and I think well above it. We talk about Christian nationalism as a thing, and there are kind of 2 basic varieties of Christian nationalism. The first, I think, is wrong, but I have some sympathy with it, and the second is totally wrong. The first is this, that you are a Christian, and you think Britain would be better if it had a load of Christian laws. And I kind of get that, and I think the Christian values of everybody having enormous dignity and all the outworkings of that are really, really important. But again, if you legislate to make people who are not Christians act as though they are, what the value is that? We're just a bunch of Pharisees then. And no value at all. The way to make a Christian country, is for enough people to put their trust in Jesus that they want to live that way. That's how you do it. But that's not really what Christian nationalism is in the States, and as I see it in some quarters of our political life in the UK as well. Christian nationalism is the appropriation of Christian symbols to endorse a particular political creed. So you had people on the Tommy Robinson March recently, chanting appalling racist slogans alongside people carrying crosses and banners saying Christ is King. And my answer to that is read your Bible for pity's sake. And then also, Jesus is Lord. He will never be your mascot. And the problem is that we see Christianity being appropriated by a particular part of the political spectrum. The left's done it as well at times, by the way. Those on the left are very happy to kind of play up the social gospel, love your neighbour, and to talk about a particular spin on the meaning of the Good Samaritan, whilst not accepting that we actually need a saviour. My quick black and white, far too simplistic simplification is on the right, people have a habit of adding stuff to the gospel, and on the left, they have a habit of tipexing it out, and they're both wrong, both wrong.
Thank you very much, Tim. I was going to say we have time for one more quick question, but there are no quick questions, I think. Tim, thanks very much
all right.
for being with us this evening, for making the time in your busy schedule.
It's a joy. Thank you very much, all of you, especially you guys. Thank you. I hope it was useful. Thank you.